And also, when you were talking about your mother's role, right? She may not have hit you, but she was complicit in the betrayal and in the violence. So I get into a lot of trouble, particularly with feminist scholars over this. They like to look at male violence and men's attitudes about women and say it's all patriarchy. And I'm not dismissing patriarchy. I'm not dismissing structural racism. But if you really want to understand how some men relate to women in terms of their attitudes and behaviors, you have to go back to their earliest childhood experiences with their mothers. And when we look at the data, particularly in Black communities on child abuse, the data tells us that the majority of the abuse and the fatalities are perpetuated by women. And so if you want to figure out why a man is a misogynist, you've got to go back to those early childhood experiences. And people don't want to have that conversation because then we have to talk about maternal violence and women's complicity in creating the very men who hate us.
Ooh. I stated that earlier.
She just dropped the mic on us. Stuff.
You got to understand how these boys are raised. Anybody can go. Let's get Boston in there because she's been sitting in her femininity, just killing it over there. Like, what's going on, girl? You muted.
Sorry, my apologies. The whole Dwayne Wade thing just bothers me to my core. I can't. But you think that the clip saying that when somebody said something about masculine women can create like gay and transgender children. Is that what was said? Am I wrong? Did I hear that right? Because I mean,
I think it was MY who said it, right?
I said I have a theory in regards to that energy because it perverts how the child views masculine energy and feminine energy in that 0 to 5 phase. So you and I also threw the other context in that sexual, with children can also create some of those things. But that's just a theory of mine. I'm not saying it's written in stone.
No, I get it. I don't know about that part. I can't really speak to that. Come back to me in a second. Let me give that some more thought, please. Thank you.
Well, to try to put some context on to help you, I think what the lady was saying in the video is that a lot of the misogynistic ways that men pick up today as grown men are linked to how they was raised as children. And what she's saying is no one wants to speak to that because then now you got to talk about the maternal impact on these young boys and why they came that way. So, because then it pretty much implicates the mother. So to absolve herself from the whole misogynistic epidemic or whatever y'all want to call it, she would have to try to shy away or just try not to have that conversation.
So, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not a feminist woman or anything like that, but I think women catch the biggest. We get blamed for everything that happens to men most of the time, and I look at things from a very fair, unbiased perspective, right? But I think that men hold a lot of weight in how a child grows up. It's not like, I don't think, and this is just me personally, I don't think women grow up and say, you know what, I aspire to be a single mom. You know what I'm saying? You get into these relationships with these men and it works out for however long it works out. Some people are married and the marriage fails and then they get a divorce and they appear as a single mother, but they were actually married and ended up divorced. So it looks like they were a single mom or they didn't have two parents in the household at one time. I just think that we have to be mindful that, though the woman has a lot of responsibility as a single mom, she's the only one there to blame. But why is the father absent? You understand what I'm saying? Like, and all the guys that leave are not Pookies and Ray Rays. It's some decent men that leave the house and forget about their children too. And I know you say, how can you put decent and forget about your kids in the same sentence? But, people are good until they're not. Right. That's the way I look at it. And I just hate that, when we have these conversations, the conversation lean towards the women being blamed for a majority of everything.
And so I want to say this.
Sharon, real quick.
Okay.
Can we get Bo in there? I promise you, we're gonna come straight to you. All right.
Sure.
Okay. Two very important things. One very important thing, and then another thing. I get your theory, M. White, about that subject, but until you have lived with a person like that in that community, you I would encourage you to talk to them. I would encourage you to seek some knowledge about it, because it's a lot more complicated than that. And so, as a person who grew up with a cousin that is trans, I really want you to seek some more knowledge about it. I get your theory. It's fair. Don't get me wrong. But I don't want you to say that again without talking to some people who have had firsthand experience of that, or who live that lifestyle. But
Oh, can
my
I respond back to you real quick?
Sure.
So I appreciate your the tact in which you're handling that, right? So my theory is again, it's a theory. So I'm not saying it's cement. I made sure to say that. But so in knowing a lot of strippers, what I found is that a large majority of them have been sexually assaulted in some way, which led to either over sexualization or like a prudish where they distance themselves and try and become asexual. Sometimes people operate normally, but those spectrums seem to skew further and further. When it comes to the men that are feminine presenting gay men, a lot of them, if you like look at the shows where they discussing the stuff, will say that something did happen. There are people who say that they were born that way. I'm not saying that does not exist, but I'm saying that the way we engage with things, when we were talking about early childhood development earlier, right? We were saying that if you're hitting your child, then they may become violent or regressive and standoffish because of the impact of that. I'm saying that those things don't necessarily mean you can have a perfect child, like you said, and you can have a child who was raised perfectly right and he still becomes violent. He still could become gay and all those things. However, there is a correlation between the people who talk about extreme, like we have we had a guy who used to follow like trans women, the men who transition, right? And then they became like sex workers. And a lot of them had those stories amongst that this was done by XYZ. Yeah. So I've seen a lot of them discuss this. I'm not just really pulling it out the air. It could be the sample size. It could be the sample size. And that's not to say you look at every one of those people who dancing or who did XYZ that they were definitely, touched as a child. I'm just saying. You say you were?
I wasn't. I used to be. I wasn't.
Right.
I wasn't an S worker. FYI, but yeah.
You used to be a dancer?
Yeah.
Okay. Majority of those women that were dancing with you, did they have some type of, like
I don't know. I was a baby.
They throw money up? Did they throw money while you were dancing?
Yeah.
We ain't
got to go into it deep. But
I don't know. I was a baby. I was only 18, so I don't know. I never had those conversations. I was
you wasn't no goddamn baby.
I know.
I like, is a baby.
Know a decent amount of dancers, and a lot of them, when you get to know them, will tell you XYZ happened.
Okay.
And then they began to sexualize themselves, and to the point where they would say, "I had control over my sexuality by being able to give it away, so nobody could take that from me." Yeah. And that's a real thing. And I'm not saying women being sexually promiscuous can only be relegated to this and this haven't happened. I'm saying that tends to be like everybody that's 7'4" not going to the NBA, but a lot of people that's 7'4" go to the NBA. You see what I'm saying?
I'm just going to say this. I've interviewed plenty of women who were in that industry, S workers, to every extent, right? From dominatrix to stripping to OnlyFans to list crawler or whatever, right? And the overwhelming majority have been violated in some way. That always comes up. It always comes up. They've been violated in some way, like you described earlier. That's so that I would say that is absolutely a contributing factor. And I have a very large sample size, and I'm pretty much really been close to the underworld and talked to a lot of people who are in that industry, like a lot. And we've had some discussions, and it always boils down to that at some point. To be honest with you, I can't think of one who didn't tell me that.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. All the ones that I knew actually told me when we got cool. I mean, they don't just come up but if you cool enough with them,
they got to feel comfortable talking to you. Yeah,
XYZ happened. And I'll go even further to like R. Kelly. What we see with him, he was sexually assaulted when he was a child, and they not talking about it. But the boarding school that Puff went to, I think I seen something where
they talked about it. Yeah. The dude. It wasn't necessarily tied to him, but the guy,
he was there
he was in trouble, and the time overlapped, so the likelihood of it was there.
The same way he didn't want to be out and be gay outwardly or do any, what I'm saying, some of the stuff he was trying to hide through his sexuality. He probably, I'm not saying it actually happened, but it does send the lead to a trend that he might have regressed some of that abuse and not talked about it to nobody, and it manifested in a way that we see with some of his sexual preferences at this point. There is a link there. I just feel there's a link there in 90% of the cases.
So I actually work with kids, and I was gonna ask you, since we know that a lot of children, boys, and mostly girls, but boys too, are violated as children, who would you say is most likely the perpetrator of that abuse of the children?
Men, mostly family members. They say is where a lot of it comes from. Yeah.
Correct.
Somebody close to the family.
And since we know that, because something that is really close to my heart as a person that works with children is, since we know that typically men are the perpetrators of that type of sexual abuse, as a man, I want to know, what are you guys working on to slow this down or maybe enforce consequences for men in the community when they violate children?
So for me specifically, if you touch one of my family members, I'm gonna end that situation so you don't touch nobody else. And when it comes to my 0 to 5 kids, my kids never had a babysitter. They never been away from us for more than a day, and that's because the other kids was being born. And nobody can watch my kids prior to them being able to speak, so they can explain any and everything that happened. Me and my wife about to go away for vacation. That's our first vacation in 5 years because we needed all of them to be able to speak at this point, right? Every day when my daughter come back from school, I drill her about everything. Who did what was going on at school? Did somebody, every single day. If she don't tell me that a kid was being mean to her or something, she can't get no ice cream. She ain't get no. If she don't punish me like she did something wrong, if she don't confide and tell me everything that's going on through the day that could have been, that I would have had an issue with, because she knows those things that made her feel extremely upset or extremely happy, either way. So yeah.